If you've been on a journey to become a writer and finish your book and get published, then guess what? You are living a coming of age plot type. Wait, what? Coming of age stories are about personal growth and self-actualization. So no matter what your age or life stage, if you're trying to become a better person and accomplish new things, you are in your own coming of age story. It's also the most common internal plot type in all storytelling. And since almost all stories have an internal plot, that means if you do the math, you have a coming of age plot in over half of all stories ever told, which is crazy, right? That being said, coming of age is one of the hardest plot types to figure out. So in this video, let's unpack how the coming of age plot type works, and more importantly, how you can use them in your stories. But before we get into this specific type of story, let's review what we know about plot types. Remember that plot types aren't outlines. They are bigger than genre, although many genres rely on plot types. A plot type is like a cheat sheet to help you recognize the essential elements that you need to deliver a great story. There are 9 plot types, and of those 9, 7 of them are external, meaning that the source of the conflict is outside of the character, whether that looks like monsters or murderers or love interests and so on. But there are 2 plot types that have internal sources of conflict, and today we're focusing on the most common one, coming of age. Real quick though, how do you know if your story has an internal plot? First, you probably do. Most novels and films have 3 plots. One main external plot, one subplot, and one internal plot. Why 3? Why that combination? That would take a much longer video, but for now, let's just say that that's the most common, natural way of structuring novels and films. What that means, though, is that if you're writing a novel or film, you probably have an internal plot. But the best way to tell if you have an internal plot is just to ask yourself, does my character change? For example, we know that Harry Potter changes in The Sorcerer's Stone. He goes from a timid boy under the stairs with no friends to the brave seeker of Gryffindor who confronts Voldemort. We know Bilbo changes in The Hobbit. He goes from this kind of fat, comfortable hobbit to the thief and warrior who steals from a dragon and stands up to the 5 armies. But we don't really know if Bella Swan changes in the first Twilight novel. We don't really know if Inspector Gamache changes in the first couple of Louise Penny novels. And that's okay. The main character doesn't always have to change for a story to work. In fact, you have whole franchises that depend on characters not changing, like Calvin and Hobbes, or A Diary of a Wimpy Kid, or Seinfeld, things like that. If your character does change, there's an internal plot. If not, then you might not have an internal plot, which is fine. You don't have to have one. If you do have one, though, if your character does change, there's a very good chance your internal plot is coming of age. Okay? But let's just back up a sec and talk about how coming of age actually works. Let's think back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and as we always talk about when we talk about plot types, all stories are about values, about the things humans want and need. So when we look at the universal human values that you find on this chart, you should be able to find the origin and even ingredients of every story ever told. And that's true for coming of age stories too. So what's the value at the heart of coming of age plots? I'm sure you can figure this one out. It's not safety, it's not love or esteem, although of course those may all be part of a character's journey of transformation. No, the value at the heart of coming of age is self-actualization. It's personal growth. It's about becoming the best version of yourself, reaching your true potential. And just as we said before, if you're going to reach your true potential, finding your identity, figuring out your worldview, where you fit into the world, these are all essential parts of self-actualization. The value scale at the heart of coming of age is maturity versus immaturity, because the character is either becoming a more mature version of themselves and discovering who they really are and how they really fit into the world, or they're becoming a less mature version. They might be becoming more confused, more muddled, more lost, more emotionally adrift, right? And we see this shift all the time in stories. Harry Potter starts out not knowing who he is, confused about magic and his identity and what happened to his parents. And by the end, he's confident enough in himself as a wizard to confront the bad guys. In Eat, Pray, Love, the memoir by Elizabeth Gilbert, she starts out lost and reeling from failed relationships. By the end, she ends up more confident, in her identity. In The Perks of Being a Wallflower, Charlie starts out alone, emotionally broken, not sure why he keeps having these dissociative moments. And he ends up beginning the process of healing from his abuse and figuring out who he is. In Bridget Jones's Diary, she goes from this kind of self-defeating character making poor choices because of her low self-image to finally standing up for herself and her self-worth. And you can have tragic examples of coming-of-age plots too. For example, The Catcher in the Rye, where Holden starts out kind of cynical and then becomes even more disillusioned as the story goes, ending with his emotional breakdown. Or Anakin Skywalker's arc in the Star Wars episode 1 through 3, where he becomes more and more lost, more confused and broken. Or even Fight Club, which sort of sets itself up as this personal growth story, almost like how-to self-help of self-actualization, only to flip everything on its head as the character realizes it's all been a construct of his split personality. And let's just say again, as with all of these plot types, coming of age is very flexible. You can see that, right? There's no right way to structure these stories. You can have happy endings, you can have sad endings, you can even not include any internal arc at all. But by understanding how this plot type works in your stories, you can figure out what's working and what's not working for you and make better, more informed decisions on what you want to do to fix things, okay? One last thing to mention about value scales, sometimes maturity versus immaturity just isn't quite clear enough to define what that really looks like in your story, right? Because maturity can look a lot of different ways depending on the character, the context of the story, even the culture that you're writing in. Coming of age is the most subjective plot type there is. And a lot of that is because it's about identity and worldview, which looks very different across cultures and time periods, even your own personal worldview, and the worldview you're trying to express in your stories. So that's just to say, when I'm writing or editing a coming of age plot, I usually find it helpful to redefine what maturity or immaturity looks like for that specific story and character. Okay, so for Bilbo in The Hobbit, you might redefine his value scale as adventurous and responsible versus boring and kind of complacent, right? Or for Mulan, the Disney film, you could say it's about her authentically being herself. That's what maturity looks like, versus immaturity might look like conforming to her cultural role, right? Or Harry Potter, you could say self-aware and assertive as being like maturity versus being ignorant of his identity and passive as immaturity. For Catcher in the Rye, you could say it's about bravely accepting reality versus idealistic escapism. And just one thing to know, I just interpreted Catcher in the Rye as a tragedy, and this is one of the reasons coming of age is so subjective, because a lot of people consider it to be a positive ending from an internal perspective, that he's bravely confronting the world's darkness and then being psychologically broken by it, which is all to say that you get to define this how you want. What does maturity look like for you? The coming of age plot is how we as writers get to say what we want about how we think the world looks and how it should look. And one thing to note is that this is also how to write a series too, right? Because it's less about the character becoming the finished version of themselves and more about here's what they're gonna learn about leadership in this film, or here's what they're gonna learn about working with other people, and so on. And in every book or film in the series, they learn a new lesson. So again, it's just very subjective and very specific to that character. So think about that for your story. Press into that question of what maturity looks like. What does immaturity look like? And of course, how do you want to show that through your story? So now you might be wondering, how do you actually do that in your story? Well, the way most coming of age plots start is through an inciting incident archetype. I call it the internal crisis or internal break, where the character gets some information that disrupts their worldview or their identity. For example, in How to Train Your Dragon, Hiccup realizes not only that he can't kill a dragon, but that a dragon can choose to not kill him, which changes everything for his self-understanding, for his identity, for his worldview. Or in Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, when Harry accidentally talks to a snake and uses magic to let it escape the zoo, realizing that maybe he's not normal like he. Or in The Matrix, when Trinity first takes over Neo's computer to talk to him, she tells him that the Matrix has him and that he needs to follow the White Rabbit to find her for answers. Or in The Hobbit, when Gandalf tells him that he can be a thief, he can go on this quest with the dwarves. Or in Great Expectations, when Pip first has that encounter with the criminal, with Magwitch, which begins to upend his whole understanding of class, of morality, of his own identity. Or for Holden in Catcher in the Rye, when he's expelled, something that forces him to confront reality, which he's been so desperate to avoid. Or for Perks of Being a Wallflower, it's the death of Charlie's best friend, which happens just before the book starts, and which changes his approach to relationships and high school. You get what I'm saying, right? Something happens that makes the character start thinking, oh, things aren't the way I thought they were. The world isn't what I thought it was. I'm not who I thought I was. I need to figure this out. And that begins the character's journey of discovery that lasts for the whole rest of the story. And that leads to the climax archetype of a coming-of-age plot, which is a revelation. Usually this happens really close to the end of the story when the main character is at their lowest and they realize, oh, I've been thinking about this all wrong. This is who I actually am. This is how the world actually works. There's some kind of revelation. I love that scene in Good Will Hunting where Robin Williams' character says again and again, it's not your fault. It's not your fault, as Will breaks down. Or in How to Train Your Dragon, where his father has just taken his dragon from him and Astrid asks him, what are you going to do? And Hiccup says, like this light bulb moment, probably something stupid. And that light bulb moment is kind of a good way to think about it, right? Because that's what this scene feels like for the character. They're realizing something major. They spent most of the story confused and trying to work things out. And this is the moment where all of the pieces come together. So that's the climax archetype. As usual, we call these archetypes, not rules. Your coming of age plot climax doesn't have to look exactly like that. But I do think it will probably have something like that in it, right? Because that's what we're doing in this plot type. If you want to become the best version of yourself, that journey of self-discovery involves these moments of revelation, these paradigm shifts. That's true in real life, and it's true in the stories we tell. So be looking for those moments for your characters. Now, there are a couple of conventions that you should know about coming of age. The first big one is mentor characters. Mentors are extremely important to both of our internal plot types, but especially for the coming of age plot. Because how do you find your place in the world? How do you discover your true identity? Humans throughout history, across cultures, have always said that we need guides. We need mentors. We need people who can show us the way. That's Gandalf for Bilbo in The Hobbit, or Dumbledore and Hagrid for Harry, or Haymitch for Katniss in The Hunger Games, Morpheus and Trinity for Neo in The Matrix, that little dragon in Mulan, Gobber and Toothless in How to Train Your Dragon, Charlie's English teacher in The Perks of Being a Wallflower. And I think one reason mentors are important, just from a writing perspective, is because they give you a chance to have some dialogue about what's going on with the character from an internal point of view. Otherwise, the character is just kind of thinking and feeling their way through the internal plot, which can be kind of boring. You can only take so much like self-talk from a character. But a mentor gives us some opportunities to show, don't tell, to externalize some of these lessons that a character is learning. It's also interesting to point out that if you have a bad mentor or even no mentor, that can sometimes end tragically. So for example, in a lot of Shakespeare plays like Othello or even Macbeth, you have these bad mentor characters like Iago or the witches and Macbeth's wife. And having a bad mentor character usually ends in tragedy. Or Emperor Palpatine in Star Wars for Anakin. Or Miss Havisham for Pip in Great Expectations. Or even Tyler Durden for Fight Club. Or that one kind of creepy drunk teacher in Catcher in the Rye. So if you want to lean your story to kind of a darker place, you can try using a manipulative or bad mentor who leads the protagonist in the wrong direction. So that's one convention, a mentor character. Another convention I think about for coming of age that we've already mentioned before is just general confusion. Okay? So the character feels lost and confused. If they feel like that at some point in your story, you might be working with coming of age. Or if you know you're writing coming of age, just make sure there are these moments where they do feel lost and confused so you can explore the full value scale. We could write a whole book about coming of age, but let's go ahead and wrap things up. So just to review, so the main driver for coming of age is identity and worldview. The value is self-actualization, and the value scale is maturity versus immaturity, which you might decide to translate for your story. The inciting incident archetype is the internal crisis or internal break. The climax archetype is the revelation. And conventions include mentor characters and just general confusion. She also mentioned that there are a couple of subtypes of coming of age that we see, especially hero's journey plots, which is a great subtype that usually combines two plot types, usually adventure and coming of age, sometimes action and coming of age. But they're almost always about achieving your full potential, which fits perfectly into the coming of age plot. But also social commentary plots, things like The Awakening or The Secret Garden or Brave New World, or some of George Orwell's books, things like that. A lot of times coming of age can be a way to advance your worldview or show your philosophy. And sometimes writers can even get more carried away with talking about their worldview than they are about telling a great story. And that's just something to be cautious of. It's great to insert your worldview into a coming of age plot, but you also want to make sure that you tell a great story. And that's where pairing it with a great external plot is so important. So how about you? Does this sound like your story? Is your character facing an identity crisis? Do they need to grow up and mature in some area of their life? Let me know in the comments if you're writing a coming of age plot. And if you do know that you're writing a coming of age story, make sure to check that you've used these elements that we've talked about, and also find some similar stories, some masterworks to study so you can make your story better. And of course, make sure you get to work. Don't miss out on future videos in this 9 plot type series. Subscribe, click the like button, maybe even click that little bell to get notified when we publish new videos. Also in the description, we'll link to our 9 plot type cheat sheets to help you figure out your plot type and how to best write it. We also have a free plot type assessment linked there. One last thing, if you're a writer, remember that you're on a journey of becoming a better version of yourself too. Writing is hard. Sometimes it comes with a lot of confusion along the way, but it's also good and important. Keep going, and we'll be here to support you when you get stuck. All right, that's it for me today. Until next time, happy writing, and we'll see you soon.